Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina.
Behavior analysis is a science of behavior.
And Doug Kostewicz.
Focus on the individual, and you're going to see focus on behavior.
For thought-provoking conversation. Welcome, everybody, to ABA On Call. And for those who can see us, you will see that we have a guest today. Today, Doug and I are joined by Dr. Clay Starlin, who is certainly been one of my own intellectual heroes. And I've known Clay for quite some time. And we're going to interview him today about a new book that he has written. So, Clay, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. And I should say at the outset, Doug and Rick are responsible for supporting and promoting the book. So thank you very much for your support and help along the way.
Awesome.
Let's start off our conversation by telling us, Clay, how did you get into the field? As a matter of fact, how would you even describe, your career? You've done a few things through time, and walk us through your background.
Well, maybe I'll start with kind of my sense of a lot of the reason that a number of people in education seem to have difficulty with sort of more of a data-based orientation is I think they get selected into the profession through the humanities door as opposed to the kind of science or math door. But I started out in undergraduate school as a pre-med major and was very much interested in science and math. Turned out that I got 6 hours of D in organic chemistry, so I decided that maybe there was some other field that I might pursue. But at the point that I encountered precision teaching, the sort of data-based, more science, math orientation was already part of kind of my orientation to looking at the world. I actually did all my undergraduate and graduate work at the University of Oregon, and probably the two major mentors I had in my master's program was Barbara Bateman, who's a well-known special education person, recently received the Council for Exceptional Children Lifetime Achievement Award, I think a few years back. And then as I started my doctoral program, Eric Houghton just had taken a position at the University of Oregon in the special education department, which was the department that I was in. And Eric was one of the first 2 students of Ogden Lindsley at the University of Kansas. And so he had finished up his doctoral program at the end. Summer of '67 and moved to University of Oregon in Eugene in the fall of 1967. I actually took the first precision teaching course in the spring of 1968. So that was kind of how I came to precision teaching. And I think another thing that was helpful in sort of finding precision teaching particularly attractive was I had actually done a lot of intelligence testing, this test called the Illinois Test of Psycholinguistic Abilities that Barbara Bateman was very much involved in. We used to go out and we'd give 7 or 8 tests of an hour and a half each, so we'd spend 10 hours just testing and a number of diagnostic tests. So I had a very kind of strong psychometric kind of testing background prior to encountering precision teaching. And when I ran into that, it was like, oh, this makes so much more sense than what I'd been doing. And so I think that also really made an important difference in my decision to pursue behavioral orientation.
So you spent a lot of time in your career in education. What were some of the, maybe briefly tell us, what were some of the things that you've done in your career?
Um, well, as I finished my doctoral program, my fantasy position was half time in the pre-service world and half time in the in-service world. So I kind of sprayed the country with a letter to places that had colleges and obviously also had communities with school districts. And my goal was to get half my salary from the college and half my salary from the school district to make sure that the commitment was there for both pre-service and in-service. I didn't quite accomplish that, but the place that came the closest was in Bemidji, Minnesota, at Bemidji State College. And what they agreed to was the college would pay my salary, but they'd loan me out half-time to the districts. And so in essence, what I had were, I was actually hired to set up what was called a Special Learning and Behavior Problem Program, SLBP, in Minnesota. So I was actually hired to establish the program at Bemidji State College. And this was a master's degree program. So what occurred was I actually had the teachers I was supervising in the field in class. And so the in-class instruction was largely around precision teaching and behavioral process. And then I'd go out, we'd look at charts as we discuss students. And, one of the really powerful things about having a standard way of looking at performance and learning is you discover things. And I actually did my dissertation in the area of reading. And one of the major kind of breakthroughs that occurred during that time in Minnesota was I walked into one of the teachers I was supervising. Her name was Artie Rado. And I'd been looking at reading charts, probably at least 1,000 by that time, a lot of oral reading charts. And I was getting growth of times 1.2, 1.3, 20, 30% a week. And I walked in and Artie had some that were like times 1.8, times 2. And I said, Artie, what are you doing? And she said, I just have the student repeat the reading. And so that was the first discovery I ran into of this concept of repeated reading. It turns out that a fellow in Minnesota named Jay Samuels got a lot of notoriety for that concept. But as far as I know, Artie was the one who discovered it. But I think that's an example of the kind of discoveries that we made throughout the years in precision teaching because we had a standard way of looking at performance and learning. I suppose the curriculum ladder format that we developed during that time was something that people responded to well. It was an attempt to just kind of list the skills under various domains such as oral reading, spelling, add, subtract, computation, multiply, divide, computation, and kind of divide it up into 3 kind of chunks. I've subsequently been, actually, it was interesting. Recently, I was sorting through my office and came across 4 of the binders of the data that we collected during that time in Minnesota that was run through the behavior research company that Ogden Lindsley founded, and mostly I was working with Carl Koenig at that time. And there were the original ladders that we used to sort of code the different skills. And we had a very sophisticated cost-benefit analysis. We were actually looking at amount of time spent, amount of money spent, and number of skills mastered. So I look back on it and think, this is powerful stuff. It's the sort of stuff that really isn't being done even now. Um, so
Clay,
anyway,
oh,
go ahead, Doug. Sorry.
I was going to say, those sound like some amazing things that you've done. I was wondering if you could tell us now a little bit about this amazing thing that you've done more recently. Tell us this book and the title of it, and kind of give us a starting synopsis.
Well, yeah, it's. I guess I've known Rick a bit longer than you, Doug, and so
That's okay.
he sort of knows that that my publication record is relatively small, and it probably has two reasons for that. A bit of perfectionistic tendencies on my part, and I think also more interested in doing what I'd consider kind of really important work and less, rather than lots of things that are not quite as good quality. So this is my one and only book.
Okay.
I've been working on, I've actually been using it in a course for the last 10 years, and I've been working on it for 20 plus. The title is Weaving Love and Science into Educational Practice. And if you will indulge me, I'll just read the introductory portion that'll give you the synopsis. An enlightened world education is a basic human right. This book is about making educational practice extraordinary. The premise of the book, the synergy of love and science is necessary for humane, exceptional education. Love and science may seem like strange bedfellows. However, they share a fundamental bond, a commitment to the truth. So that's sort of the concept of what the book is about. I worked very hard, and if you follow anything about trying to make things simple, you know how hard it is to make things simple. So I worked very, very hard on trying to make this a document that was maybe more user-friendly than some previous materials that were certainly sophisticated and important, but probably a little more technical than the audience I was aiming at. And the audience I'm aiming at is basically people who teach, whether it's a parent, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a college professor, or it's a certified, K-12 teacher. I was trying to get a book that they might pick up and they wouldn't get turned off with it being too technical.
Right.
Now the thing I actually say early in the book is, in order for education to be an effective science, there's some technical detail that's required. So I kind of think of it as something like medicine, which most of us are aware of. Is there may be some procedures that some physicians would prefer not to use, but they're really important because they help them make decisions and intervene. And I think sometimes in education, too often, we say we don't like something, and that's not the right question or the right response. It's like, will this help me help children? And if that's the case, then we should pursue it. And that's how I feel about the scientific part of the book. The book actually is in three parts. The first part is what I call the science of education, which relates largely to the precision teaching technology. Second part relates to kind of what I'd kind of consider more generic intervention procedures, some foundational things like importance of sleep and nutrition, and then organizing the learning environment, and then the third part of, or the third section of that second part has to do with kind of some generic learning tactics. And the final part I title Love Education. And back in '85, I actually wrote a monograph called Love and Fear, which a number of people in our community are somewhat familiar with. And this third part has a lot of kind of an updating of that information. And the notion being that I guess the way I've sort of viewed education is I've worked with a lot of teachers over the years, and I can think of one in particular, maybe a couple others, that I thought shouldn't be in education. But basically people get into education because they love children. So I've always kind of felt that we have the love part of education pretty well in place. But the science part has been sort of lagging. So hopefully we can kind of marry those two together effectively. We will, in fact, have more extraordinary education. So I guess that's it's a long answer to your question, Doug.
I liked it. What I really liked was what you said early was you came into education from a science perspective rather than a humanities perspective, but you've come full circle now to saying the science has to be there, but we also have to attend to a lot of other things that once you attend to that science side and you get your numbers and you make database decisions, you can still have room for all that love, the emotions, the caring then can be aimed in the right direction. So it was interesting when you said that early and then you said it here that they've got a marriage. So that's great.
Yeah, well, this isn't an exact analogy, but I've always I guess I describe myself as in the author note as an educational scientist. So as much as I've seen myself as a scientist, I've always felt that both objective and subjective information should be married. And so things like imagination and intuition and emotion shouldn't be excluded. They just need to be connected to objective information. Like, when I've sat in IEP meetings and there's been a discrepancy between teacher or parent opinion and the objective information, I wasn't necessarily trusting one or the other. I was more interested in why is there a discrepancy? Why is the data saying one thing and the teacher or the parent is saying something else? So I always wanted the gestalt of what a parent or teacher would get in the 6 hours or 8 hours a day they were with the student, as opposed to the few data points that we collect over a day or week or month.
So we have a number of behavior analysts who listen to our show, and behavior analysts, although you might consider what they do therapy, a lot of it involves education. And I'm curious, when you talk about the science, what are the big things? So someone who's new, and whether it's precision teaching or the science of education, what are the big takeaways, maybe the top 2 or 3 that they would get from reading your book? And I guess I should say, not just what they get from it, but things that they would want to incorporate to be better at educating the people they're working with.
Well, I mean, maybe I might summarize it in terms of the kind of the 3 parts. Hopefully, the first thing you might get is the importance of a science of education. I think, if you look back historically, you might say with the scientific revolution starting in the 16th century, that science has really improved our lives in terms of its discoveries and kind of pushing back at superstition and myth. And so I think we should expect the application of science to education to make similar contributions to improving education. And pretty much if you think of science, that kind of foundational to a science becoming, or a discipline becoming a science, is measurement, in terms of measurement units, measurement display systems, measurement procedures, measurement analysis. And so once those kinds of things get standardized within a science, the science tends to start learning things and improving practice. So I think that's what really the first part of the book is striving to establish, and it kind of goes through those various elements of what are the important educational measures, how should we display those measures, what sorts of procedures should we use to collect information. So that's one of the takeaways I'd hope people would get. The second is, what are the ways we should organize the environment and consider important instructional and intervention tactics to ensure that students are learning at an optimal level. So that's the second part, is what are some of the important kind of intervention variables to consider. So that would be hopefully a third takeaway. And fourth, the importance of maybe not shying away from the word love. I think it's so sort of central to being human that oftentimes people have difficulty talking about it. They'd rather use kindness or compassion or other words, but love was sort of like, and of course some scientific people would want to stay away from it totally because they would view that as non-scientific. But in some ways what I've done in the third part is I've actually tried to bring science into looking at that concept. So I've actually defined the concept of love as a gift of behaving to enhance life, which actually came from the original Love and Fear book. And there was also some charts in that section about how you might, I had some students, I used to have one of these really stupid classes of 150 undergraduate students at the University of Oregon. And I required all of them to do certain projects, and one was to do some personal social projects. So I have projects of loving acts, of saying hello to people as a way of connecting. So there's some data in that third section that actually talks about how you might actually keep track of something we call love, or the of what I think of as the antithesis of love is fear rather than hate, since I think our hateful things grow from our fears. So the third part is really trying to get us to think about how we can create a more loving, less fearful world using the science. So those, I guess, would be the three big takeaways I'd hope folks would get.
Your third part, and just you talking about, I know that you discussed loving behaviors, and you talk about charting these, and you also have spent a lot of time talking about recording things that we can see, which many people are very comfortable with that, but things we can't see. In other words, things that exist inside of us that only we have access to. All of a sudden, people get really uncomfortable when you start either talking about that, or somehow you say, well, gee, if someone charts this and they put it on and they do their own intervention, many people just think that that's almost off limits, that you shouldn't do that. But yet you spend this a big part of your text expounding on why that's important, and not just that, but how to do it. So I'm interested, how long have you been doing this, and are these activities that you're doing in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I basically, as indicated, I started in precision teaching in '68. So you can, if you do the math, that's over 50 years. And so at the beginning, I was counting inners, and I've certainly done that off and on over my career. The most recent one, I'm not doing it right now, but the most recent thing I was counting was kind of gratitude or thank yous, inner thank yous about things I'm grateful for. But I think it's important for those who are within the behavior analysis community to realize that Skinner was talked about private events. That was the term he used, and so it wasn't something that he felt was out of the purview of behavioral science. I don't know that he necessarily had kind of moved into thinking about counting it. Probably in the precision teaching community, Abigail Culkin is the one who's done the most recent and long-term work in that area. But certainly we're all aware of our thoughts, and we can count them and our feelings and our urges, and I guess a purist could argue with the validity and reliability issues around those counts, but I should have done better on this over the years, but I have lots of charts with lots of inner behavior changes and lots of testimonials. One that comes to mind recently, and of course I'm now a visiting professor at Worcester State University in Massachusetts, and I had a teacher in my class who had a daughter in her 20s who had a lot of negative self-talk, and so she actually counted, positive things about herself and negative things, and she did the 1-minute writing that I think Abigail actually Culkin started. She'd write 1 minute positives about herself, and the report of her mother as this was just over a semester. She's a changed person. She didn't want to date. She was dating. She got a boyfriend. She's smiling more. So I wish I'd had both the daughter and the mother on tape to have that testimonial. Now I have that chart, and I can show the acceleration and deceleration. Was all the data perfectly accurate from those inner counts? No one knows. Probably not even the person who was doing the counting. But you can look at the testimonial and the external behavior based on that and say, yeah, I think something changed. So I get that there's some concern in some parts of the more strict scientific community, but I've had a lot of inductive evidence that it's really helped lots of folks.
Mm-hmm. I guess reflecting on your text, we're getting close to our time here, but in part one, what I so appreciate, and I've read a lot of, most of your work, all the things I can get my hands on in the past, and especially this book, that you do a masterful job explaining to people in very simple terms that if we're interested in performance, if that's what we want to see changed, you talk about recording it with frequency, and then when you place it on a standard graph that allows people to look at the slope, and you can make quantitative as well as visual insights as to what that means in terms of change. So you have performance, you have learning and change, or call it what you will, but I think that's going to resonate with many people that pick up your book, and certainly I would like to say, congratulations on writing that and talking about that in a way that's incredibly understandable, because many of the texts that are out there, and I'm guilty of this myself, I write as a scientist, I write as a technical writer. And as you said very early on, yes, science is important. Yes, technical writing is important. But what's more important is being able to translate that so that people can use it and understand it. And that's what you've done.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that comment, because that was certainly part of the major goal, was to take something that certainly has some technical detail and acknowledge that you need to maintain some of that, but try to get it in a form that is hopefully digestible to a wider audience than maybe just the behavior analysis community or just the precision teaching community. And probably a little bit of the strategy of putting love in the title was that maybe some people who wouldn't pick up a science book might pick up this book, and so hopefully they would say, well, it has love in there, so I'll pick it up, and maybe the science part didn't seem so bad after all.
Yeah, but it's not false advertising. There's a lot of love in that book. It's not just in the title. So
that's true. I mean, I wasn't trying to be cute about it, but I actually, as I said, I say, I think in the preface, that if you sort of, as a scientist, shy away from love, thanks for picking up the book. And if you are more inclined to be kind of focused on the loving part, thanks for picking up the book as well. So.
Well, Clay, I want to thank you on behalf of Doug and all of our listeners. This was a fascinating discussion. We, in our resource page, will link to the book if people are interested in that. And I thank you again for your time. And for everyone, thank you all too for joining us on ABA On Call.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call.